Hey everybody, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I have an article reviewed for you. It's actually an article that Scott Adams retweeted from someone else, and he said that we're not due to see he's competent, but we don't like what he's doing until later this year. This is just some foreshadowing. And talking about this Guardian article where this guy said, and so it begins. So what is this article? Well, your worst nightmare, a successful Donald Trump presidency. Could we see, possibly, in The Guardian, a positive Donald Trump article? Well, let's look into this. Sergeant Michael Verardo, who lost an arm and a leg while serving with the U.S. Army in Afghanistan in 2010, says he was failed by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And what happened with the Veterans Affairs was horrible. I know in my state of Wisconsin, there were literally veterans, forget the lines, there were literally veterans overprescribed opiates to the point where one died. One veteran died. That's how bad the situation was. And you're talking, okay, so maybe that was an accident, right? Well, no, there was actually a whistleblower about it who was saying for months that this issue was happening. And on top of it, this was like a systemic problem. Furthermore, there was complete incompetence in terms of the doctors who were running things, because they couldn't even sterilize things properly. Due to a lack of proper sterilization, it was basically hundreds of people. I think it was like over 300 people. Veterans were at risk of, HIV, AIDS, or HIV, I guess it would be, and other, terrible possible things that you could contract from needles that aren't properly sterilized. So what happened with the VA, and I know in Arizona and other places it was even worse than here, but he had to wait 57 days to get his prosthetic leg fixed, and 3.5 years for adaptation to his home. But then came Donald Trump. And by the way, it's kind of pathetic that American veterans have to wait this long who go to Veteran Affairs, because there are literally doctors who take 3D printers to Africa and just print out prosthetics extremely quickly, and it, it's like within the same day or the next day, is very quickly they have a new prosthetic. And now I know it's not as good of one as you'll get in the United States, but it's kind of pathetic how far behind in speed the Veterans Affairs is. From literally one doctor who takes a 3D printer to Africa. So it says, thank you, President Trump and Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin, for ensuring that we are not forgotten and that we will receive the care we need and deserve, Verardo said at the White House recently. So Trump actually is helping the veterans, despite what some of the mainstream media wants to claim. Trump signing an act to protect VA whistleblowers, reveled in the moment, using his fingers to mime a gun and mouthing his catchphrase, "You're fired," at Shulkin. See, Trump is he's just hilarious. Then he smiled. "We'll never use those words on you, that's for sure." The audience in the East Room laughed dutifully. It's not that the audience laughs because they have to. I mean, some people probably laugh out of courteousness, but a lot of people laugh because Trump is legitimately funny. To say it dutifully is to be misleading, and I don't have a big problem with that, but with what they're saying here. But I just want to point out, even in the press conferences where the media hates him. Almost the entire media in there hates him. And when he called like CNN, I think he was talking to Acosta, and he's like, CNN, I'm done with calling CNN fake news. They're very fake news. And the whole place starts laughing because Trump is just legitimately funny. um. Anyways, so this is the parallel universe that Trump occupies whenever he can. A universe of achievements, applause, and adoration, a safe space where he is a monarch of all he surveys and his punchlines land. In his version of Washington, he is the Henry V-style man of action to Barack Obama's indecisive, crippling intellectual Hamlet. Trump's self-belief appears to get a shot in the arm from every victory, real or imagined. This may go some way to explain why, even as his approval ratings fall off a cliff and some call for his impeachment, he sees no reason to course correct, as he and a noisy caucus around him seem to become ever more self-righteous. Well, actually, this isn't completely true, because he actually has had a lot of victories, and he actually hasn't fallen off a cliff in terms of approval ratings. I mean, take a look. This is President Trump job approval rating, max. So this is like when the election was going on. And sure, you had the initial spread, but as of recent, he's actually coming back around the 13th, which is before the article was written. He actually came back and leveled out a little bit. So he was actually going in the right direction when this article was written. So Trump's self-belief appears to get a shot in the arm from I read that. But yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you want to? This is what Trump does very well too, is when there is any sort of victory, he makes sure people know about it, because the media is not going to report it as a victory. So sure, they didn't, in South Carolina and stuff, it wasn't really challenged by the Democrats, and the Republicans won. But why not celebrate it? A Republican won. Trump is much more resilient than his opponents allow, said Newt Gingrich for the former House Speaker, before pivoting to a plug for his new book, Understanding Trump. Oh, that's just a hit on. Come on. The past 2 weeks illustrate how, when on the ropes, Trump can still throw some punches that at least get him to the bell, and he makes sure his 33 million Twitter followers know about it. When Republican Karen Handel beat Democrat Jon Ossoff in a Georgia race, much hyped as a referendum on his presidency, Trump tweeted, "Thank you, Fox News. Huge win for President Trump and GOP in Georgia congressional special election." Well, I mean, yeah, a Republican is supposed to win here, but this Republican was actually outspent. The Democrats put everything into this race. This was the most costly race in history for a House seat. And the Republicans still won. I mean, why the heck wouldn't you celebrate that? This is something that hurt the Democrats badly to lose. They spent a lot of money just to lose. Then the president headed to Iowa to bask in the adulation of his supporters in the forum he likes best, a campaign-style rally when he ranted against the dishonest media and floated the idea of solar panels on his border wall. The crowd lapped it up. Well, it's, here's why the solar wall is so popular. On the left, you have the people, either they were already against the wall, or they were swayed by having, or at least they hate it less by having solar panels on it because of green energy. And, there are some other legitimate concerns like the cost. And this puts, into motion, basically, or it shows people how the wall wouldn't be this huge burden to the taxpayer. and that eases some concerns. And on the right, you have innovation. It's not so much about it being solar or green on the right. It's the fact that on the right they love energy, independence, and which even solar energy counts towards, and they love innovation. And this is something massively innovative that we could be proud of as a country. Look, we built this wall, and we did it with solar energy. Nobody else has ever done this. I mean, it would be a huge achievement for the country. Then the president headed to Iowa to bask in the adulation of his supporters in the forum he likes best. Trevor Noah, host of the Comedy Central's The Daily Show, commented, what was really impressive to see last night? How Trump supporters are so on board with their dude, he can say anything and they'll come along for the ride. I mean, I don't understand how that's your attack on Solarwall, but whatever. Trevor Noah is a completely lost cause. The dude is an idiot. He is one of those true regressives, like hardcore regressive. And some media outlet was dumb enough to give him a platform. Then came the veterans event at the White House where, under the gaze of portraits of George Washington and Teddy Roosevelt, Trump projected himself as a man who gets things done. Well, he is. I mean, he signed more executive orders than any president in basically modern history. It's been a while since any other president has signed more executive orders than he has. We've announced that the VA will finally solve a problem that has plagued our government for decades, he said, referring to the transfer of veterans' medical records from the Department of Defense to the VA. A seemingly simple process that has earned comparisons to the incompatibility of the Xbox and PlayStation. And this shows, Trump is willing to look at the minute details, or his administration is. Something like this is a big deal and should be relatively easy to solve, but it's something that can be easily overlooked as well. I mean, the Obama administration didn't fix it. Why not? Meanwhile, Trump finally caught a break on the worst crisis facing his presidency. By the way, to answer, I left it open, but to answer that question is because I don't think they really recognized it as a problem. They didn't identify it like Trump has. Meanwhile, Trump finally caught a break on the worst crisis facing his presidency: the multiple investigations into his election campaign's links to Russia. First, David Brooks, a Trump critic and New York Times columnist, suggested that the scandal may be overblown. It's titled, "Let's Not Get Carried Away." And this is from about 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but the final paragraph is, "Things are so bad that I'm going to have to give Trump the last word." On June 15th, he tweeted, They made up a phony collusion with the Russian story, found zero proof, so now they go for obstruction of justice on the phony story. Unless there is some new revelation that may turn out to be pretty accurate commentary. And Trump has turned out to be right over and over and over on this stuff. But it's the mainstream media makes him right. Like, I am a fan of Trump, but I have to admit, it's hard for Trump to be wrong on a lot of this. I mean, when all the media does is lie about you, all you have to do is argue against the mainstream media, and they will naturally make you right. A lot of times they know what the truth is and purposefully take a false stance. So just oppose the mainstream media and you will inherently be right a large portion of the time. It's actually very few times when the mainstream media gets it right and they tell the truth. And I'm going to that extent. They're lying, in many different ways. It is a narrative they're pushing, but they're doing it by actually like giving false statements. They do it by omitting certain things that change the message, and all you have to do is oppose the mainstream media. And I think David Brooks, he understands this is a losing strategy, and he by no means is trying to help President Trump. Let's be clear about that. He's not even trying to be honest. This is an article about strategy. And let's listen to what he had to say on Meet the Press.
When a company that helps Americans plan for the future works with a team from Goldman Sachs, a unique collaboration begins.
Right after we listen
an innovative
to this
product is created, and Western and Southern makes progress.
Now that we're selling Goldman Sachs.
Columnist for the New York Times, Amy Walter, national editor of the Cook Political Report, Danielle Pletka of the American Enterprise Institute, and Eugene Robinson, columnist for the Washington Post. Welcome all. You've heard all the interviews. David Brooks, do you have any better sense of where the president is this morning on this investigation?
You know, I'm actually getting more uncomfortable with this whole deal, thinking that maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. And I'm bothered by the lack of emerging evidence about the underlying crime, that there was actually collusion or coordination between the Trump White House. And so what's happened is we've surrounded...
Jesus, talk about dropping the truth. Can you just imagine the other people? You know, so there are David Brooks is intelligent and he knows what he's talking about. And he knows that, this Russia narrative is bullshit. But can you imagine being one of the useful idiots that the mainstream media employs? And this whole time, all that's been talked about is Trump, Russia, and, they're in this echo chamber, and this is what they honestly believe. And now he's sitting there next to him, telling him, I think it's kind of bullshit. Can you just imagine their reaction? From their ally, they were probably not expecting this.
Surrounded the president with this legal minefield. And Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, steps all over the legal minefield and blows him up 6 ways from Sunday.
I love how he says that. Blows him up 6 ways from Sunday. Yeah, that's actually true that that Trump does. And it's not just legal minefields, but there are a lot of just political minefields in general that Trump will, step on. But a lot of times what he does is he'll spring the trap, if you know what I mean. He purposefully, he knows there's a trap there. He'll step on it. He spring the trap, and then you don't have to deal with it anymore. And, you deal with it then, and then it's done. And he's been very successful doing this, and the people are largely behind him, so I don't see why he'll change it. Usually he's springing these traps on purpose. A couple of times I think he fell into a trap, but overall, he's purposefully stepping on these quote-unquote bombs or minefields.
But it's become an investigation about itself. And, I've lived through Whitewater, I've lived through a lot of these, and there's a lot of shady behavior that don't rise to the Watergate level. And I'm just afraid we're being swallowed up by the politics of scandal when there's less and less evidence that they actually colluded. Maybe that'll come out, but so far it hasn't, and it bothers me.
Yeah. There you go. Look at that face. Look at that face. That is the face of a useful idiot. So that's what you have there. And so let's get back to our article here. There may be a giant revelation still to come, Brooks wrote, but as the Trump-Russia story has evolved, it is striking how little evidence there is that any underlying crime occurred, that there was any actual collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and the Russians. Everything seems to be leaking out of this administration, but so far the leaks about actual collusion are meager. Then the Washington Post published, and we're seeing a shift. This is what most of the article is actually about. This is the guts, and they're hiding it in the middle. But This is a huge shift. You have David Brooks basically supporting Trump and saying get away from Trump Russia. The Guardian's re-reporting it, saying, effectively saying get away with Trump Russia. They want to the smart people on the left want to get away from this Trump Russia narrative. CNN has already hugely backpedaled off of it. And they took a couple days where they weren't talking about a whole lot. And now they're like on mental health. That's not a winning strategy either, but they're trying to say, Trump's incompetent due to his mental health and he needs to be impeached for that reason. I mean, so the media is burying this Trump Russia narrative, and this is a huge win for Trump. But then at the that gave Trump the opening he needed to deflect and disrupt the prevailing narrative. The real story is that President Obama did nothing after being informed in August about Russian meddling, he tweeted. With 4 months looking at Russia under a magnifying glass, they have 0 tapes of Trump people colluding. There is no collusion and no obstruction. I should be given an apology. Trump is correct. He should be given an apology, but will he? No, because the mainstream media is at war with him. They're mad that they're losing. They're not apologetic for getting something wrong. They're not trying to get things right. They're trying to push a narrative. The mainstream media in the United States today is pure propaganda. He was handed another gift when CNN was forced to retract the report, citing a single anonymous source. Okay, they keep calling these gifts, but these aren't really gifts. I mean, Trump has a lot to do with what's going on to expose this. But he was handed another gift when CNN was forced to retract the report, citing a single anonymous source that Congress was investigating a Russian investment fund with ties to Trump officials. It changed nothing about the Russia-related cloud over Trump, but it did feed into his narrative that untrustworthy media organizations are conspiring against him. But that's because they are. So, I mean, I am glad that they're saying this, but at the same time, they're completely ignoring that there's no way for the media to push this Trump-Russia narrative without being an untrustworthy media organization, because that's conspiring against them, because in order to push that narrative, they actually have to lie and they have to conspire against Trump. See, this is the problem about a strategy where you go to war with someone as a news outlet, and you're gonna inherently damage your credibility when you're just making shit up. The president gloated, so they called fake news CNN cold, but what about NBC, CBS, and ABC? What about the failing New York Times, Washington Post? They are all fake news. And it's true, but CNN is being exposed really badly right now. And I have a prediction that, probably the Washington Post is next, but maybe, one of these other ones, but I think whoever Project Veritas goes after next, because I think they're going to, they went after CNN first. I think they're going to move on to another outlet and expose them. It says, Politico reported that Trump and his allies believe he's gained a technical advantage in his war with the media, which intensified over the weekend, adding that many White House staff members were elated by the CNN blunder, reckoning it will prove to skeptical voters that the mainstream media has a vendetta against this administration. And they absolutely do have a vendetta. The president's supporters seized on the incident to plant seeds of confusion and false equivalency. If that Russia story was wrong, perhaps all of them are wrong? Yet another lifeline was thrown to Trump from an unexpected quarter. the Supreme Court partially restored his executive order, imposing a travel ban on 6 Muslim-majority countries, and said it would hear arguments in the autumn. After setbacks in lower courts, the president was quick to crow about a clear victory. And Trump had been expecting this. He had been stating it for... The thing is, Trump was predictive on this. For weeks and weeks he said, the first courts are very liberal courts, and they're gonna rule against... They might have ruled against me, but we'll go to the Supreme Court, and they'll vote for us because they'll rule for us because they're much more conservative. And Trump was exactly right in how the process would play out so far. A success in spite of himself scenario. And I think this is just how they're trying to cope with it. I don't really see how you can say that Trump is succeeding despite himself, because Trump is basically leading his administration. I mean, more than most presidents lead. Like Obama was more managing his people, and Trump does manage, but his narrative, Trump has a lot to do with his narrative. Trump's much more than I thought, honestly. I thought he'd be more of a manager in the end, but no, he is the leader. Trump's parallel universe also consists of speeches, bill signings, Oval Office photo ops, and meetings with foreign leaders with whom he has, of late, stopped taking questions from the media, preferring to be lavish with praise that often jars with the national conversation. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, for example, thanked Trump for having spent so much time with me, for having spoken such kind words about me and my country. In this journey of India-American relations, I think I should like to thank you for providing great leadership. Now, is it just me? Or is this an example of Trump actually being the reason he's successful? It's specifically his time that he's spending with the Indian leader. But they're trying to paint it's despite Trump because the Indian leader praised him. This whole thing is ridiculous. But I'm just happy The Guardian has... they're starting to criticize the Trump-Russia narrative. Says that none of these examples comes without caveats. Handel's victory in Georgia was in a seat that Republicans have held since 1979. Fair enough. You're omitting that the Democrats tried hard for the seat and spent more money in it and all of that I already said. But, this single criticism is fair. Democrats say Trump's proposed budget will make it harder for veterans to receive care. The Russian, but is that actually true? The Russia investigations are likely to drag on for years and could find that Trump obstructed justice when he fired FBI Director James Comey. The Supreme Court did not fully reinstate his travel ban, granting exemption to people with a bona fide relationship with someone in the U.S. Fair enough. And his campaign promise to repeal and replace Obamacare remains in limbo on Capitol Hill, while the president has been condemned by both parties for a crude attack on TV host Mika Brzezinski. I don't agree with everything in this paragraph as a legitimate criticism. As a convincing criticism, I should say. But at least it's honest. And if they always spoke like this, I would have no issue with the media. But this isn't how they normally write articles. They normally come up with complete bullshit. But politics, after all, is often a battle of perception. Neil Ferguson, a British historian and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution in Stanford, California, said in May, I think one of the things Guardian readers and their counterparts on the American coast don't want to think about is the possibility that despite his obvious ineptitude, Trump might actually be successful. I don't agree that Trump is inept, but so that's just a matter of opinion, really. And I agree that Trump being successful is a huge problem for the Democrats. I said last summer to a bunch of liberal friends, your worst nightmare is not a Trump presidency. It's a successful Trump presidency. The successful Trump presidency scenario is one in which, despite it all, the economy does better thanks to deregulation and tax cuts, which is happening right now. The economy is growing pretty well, and the job growth is very good. Foreign policy delivers some big wins on North Korea, the Middle East. It doesn't, and Trump did get some big wins in North Korea with how China they're buying U.S. coal over North Korean coal. That's a big slap in the face to North Korea, and it hurts their economy. So it doesn't take an awful lot for a president to start looking good. If the expectations start really low, that is key. If the expectations start really low, it's not just that expectations are low for Trump. He also works to lower his expectations. This is something I've noted over and over. His strategy, if he puts the expectations at the bottom, if he can get everybody to think that, he's going to be a complete failure, there's no chance of success, the chance of Trump being elected is like 1.8% or whatever, according to the Huffington Post, stuff like that. If he fails, that's no big deal. He was supposed to fail. If he succeeds, then it was a massive success. And the left needs to stop getting baited into lowering the expectations. They need to raise the expectations. They should be saying, Trump's probably going to pass this legislation, or like with the healthcare bill, Trump's leadership will probably, with his backing, he'll probably get this healthcare bill through, and then criticize the bill and say, that won't be good for Americans. And then if it fails, be like, this was something easy with only the Republicans doing the healthcare. They're pretty much not even allowing the Democrats in, and he couldn't even lead his own Republican Party. I mean, just think about what a massive disaster that would look like for Trump. But the mainstream media is too stupid to do that. So which they have done, it may be one win, and I definitely don't rule out of a kind of success in spite of themselves scenario. And then you begin to wonder if a left of Clinton Democrat in 2020 would be blown away. Yeah, so I just don't agree with, if a president's successful, he always has something to do with it. So it's not in spite of himself. We'll see. The fun thing about doing history is you really can't tell at this point which way it will go. It could quite easily go Jimmy Carter, and he could be a lame duck. The president has not given a solo press conference since February 16th. Since May 11th, he has not given a TV interview to a channel other than the staunchly supportive Fox News. Combined with increasingly terse White House press briefings, often off camera, the pattern suggests that Trump is focused on firing up his base and has all but given up on reaching beyond it. I don't know if that's true. I guess it depends how you define the base. Trump has his base, and then he gets a lot of middle people, and then, he got a bunch of Bernie Sanders. People call them afterburners. So they came over to Trump's side, or they left the Democrats and went third party, which is like half a vote for Trump. So I guess it depends. Are independents that voted for Trump last election part of his base or not? Michael Bennet, chairman of the Republican Party in Palm Beach County, Florida, said, I haven't seen Trump lose any bit of support on the ground here. I hear people say he's not presidential, but it looks like he is beginning to redefine what it means to be presidential. He's not going to take it lying down, but he's going to stand up for himself and give it back. yeah, there's something to be said for being presidential can also mean winning, basically. And I think that's probably a uniquely American thing, where Americans still expect the USA to be number one in everything. If we're not number one, we're in something, we're unhappy about it. And so I think if Trump, even if he acts childish or immature or whatever, if that's what makes him win, especially if it's perceived that his immaturity or whatever specifically is helping him win, then it will be seen as presidential. At least by his base. But it won't be seen as presidential by his opponents or the people in the middle, like the independents. We believe, just as President Clinton said, it's all about the economy. That's what people care about most. Not Russia or climate change, but things that affect them personally, like putting food on the table. If Trump focuses on that, he'll win again in 2020. And I agree with that. I mean, the economy is what impacts people the most. If you don't have a job, you want a job. If you're not making a lot of money, you want to make more money. If you own a business, you want your taxes to go down, and you want, people to, you want more shoppers effectively. So, and all that comes from a better economy. Most Americans see this as a failure of a president. I definitely don't agree with this in the way that they're describing, but Trump's string of wins, as he sees them, has emboldened them. This week at the luxury hotel in Washington, he hosted his first re-election campaign fundraiser. George Ajan, a Republican consultant and strategist, said, "The early political burials of Trump and impeachment whispers were wishful thinking. Remember, we are not even 6 months into his presidency. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and most of the bowl is still untasted. The fixation of Trump's enemies on Russia is not strategic. They are wasting their time hoping for a silver bullet made in Moscow." That's true. Like, this is an emotional push they made, and they got beat, and they're like, "We'll show you. We're going to get you kicked out of office." But it wasn't really realistic that they'd get him kicked out. And the other thing is, when you start that, like, literally pretty much before Trump is even sworn in, that you're going to get him kicked out and impeached, well, that just makes it look like you're making stuff up, and that it's, that's a good way to lose support for it. And now, people are desensitized to it. They're not going to support impeachment for the most part when you've been talking about it for months and months and months, and everything's been bullshit that you've been saying. Imagine if there's a real reason to impeach him, 6 months from now. You're going to have already brought up impeachment for so long that people are going to just tune it out. But from vulgar tweets to healthcare, Trump remains highly combustible as the healthcare legislation continues to falter. His reputation as a deal maker is on the line. Last week, Senate Republicans postponed a vote as they argued over the way forward. Some complain that the president lacks a grasp of the basic issues. House Republicans are also reportedly furious that he branded their bill mean. And effectively, he did do that, which is kind of funny. But he also forced the bill to change by doing that, and it shows that Trump is willing to he's willing to be a leader and go against the Republican Party. And I think oftentimes he does it for their own good, because the Republicans were trying to push something that the American public would have hated the Republicans if they had gotten it through. And you would have seen, by Trump basically killing that version of it, he protected his re-election. That's how I view it. Failure to appeal and replace Obamacare would no doubt be a colossal failure. But I was going to say, in healthcare, this is a serious issue. Like, I don't think the delaying by a couple weeks is a big deal, but and it certainly doesn't matter to Trump. I don't think it makes Trump look like a bad leader. What's a big deal is the final result, and it has to come relatively quickly. It can't come, a year and a half from now. Failure to repeal and replace Obamacare would no doubt be a colossal failure, but the alternative might be worse. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the Senate plan would leave 22 million more people uninsured and gut Medicaid, breaking Trump's promise to protect it. Well, you already explained that Trump was largely against this plan. He labeled it mean. And the new Congressional Budget Office estimate actually got that number way down. If you calculate out what the Senate would leave uninsured and what Obamacare would leave uninsured, because of these healthcare providers backing out, it actually comes out to dead even. I think the number was both would leave 19 million uninsured. And that was Ron Johnson said that. His hardcore supporters in states such as West Virginia would be hardest hit. Well, West Virginia is just a hardcore Republican state, regularly so. If no legislation is passed, Trump and his allies will have the option of trying to muddy the waters by blaming the intrinsic, I can't say that word, and dysfunction of Washington. The message will be, look, I tried, but the politicians got in the way. And, well, there is some truth to that, though. I mean, Congress is completely inept, and the people know it's why they constantly have single-digit approval ratings. And Trump's just one guy. He doesn't even have power in the Congress. All he can do is try to convince people and be a third-party mediator, basically. And he's got, like, some veto power of bills and stuff, but for the most part, I mean, Congress has to be Congress. Frank Luntz, a Republican consultant and pollster, counseled patients. With Donald Trump, every news cycle is a lifetime. Never assume he's dead, because he always rises from the ashes of some political or personal error. And never assume that he's safe, because the next political explosion is no more than days away. Trump's approval rating hovers at an average of 40%. John Hudak, a senior, and 40% is about what you need to get reelected. From models I've showed in the past, like at Real Clear Politics, Trump was, the Senate was saying Republican. Even if he goes down to like 36% or lower, it'll be like 50-50, and somewhere around 38%, and the Republicans still win a majority in the Senate. John Hudak, a senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution think tank in Washington, warned his supporters see someone they see as presidential. The problem is that most Americans don't. Most Americans see this as a failure of a president and don't agree with handling of the economy or his handling of foreign policy. I don't actually agree with this. But, we're far from the elections. I don't think a lot of people are paying attention. But what has Trump even done on foreign policy? He hasn't. He's done things with other countries, but he hasn't gotten any major war or anything like that. The one decision he did make in Syria, people were largely behind him on that. So I have a hard time believing that people are largely against him on foreign policy. And in terms of the economy, he's growing, his base is still behind him who elected him largely for the economy. So I don't believe this either. And not just his base, but, Republicans as a whole. It's like over 85%. Hudak added, no one is supporting Trump because 3 people at CNN resigned. This love fest over Republicans winning Republican House seats is worrying. To some extent, maybe, but I wouldn't be too worried about it. I think you celebrate your wins, but behind the scenes, if there are some reasons to be worried. South Carolina was way too close, but overall, where they put their attention, they won greatly. So, and I'm talking about Georgia. It's kind of funny because the more attention the Democrats put on something, the worse they do. They put attention on Kansas and Montana and also Georgia, mostly in Georgia, and in Montana, I mean, the guy even body slammed a reporter like right before the election. And and when he did that, he actually his money actually went up, and he actually gained support. So he financially, anyways, but from a perspective of should Trump be touting these as wins? Yes, because the Democrats have made them races. Why are they making races out of traditionally Republican areas that they can't win, and they're just wasting money? On Friday, there was another little notice celebrated in the Oval Office as Trump signed an executive order reviving the National Space Council. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, quipped, "Infinity and beyond." Perhaps not aware of the reference to Toy Story's Buzz Lightyear, Trump replied, This is infinity here. It could be infinity. We don't really don't know, but it could be. It has to be something, but it could be infinity, right? Yeah, he's talking about the size of the universe. So, interesting article. So basically, The Guardian, to sum this up, is worried that Trump is succeeding, and they're raising the alarm bells to the rest of their media that get away from this Trump Russia. James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, they put the nail in the coffin. It was already a failing narrative, but James O'Keefe put the nail in the coffin. So I'll talk to you guys later.